Filch?
One.
One.
One personal protection.
That's Title 10.
It is a Title 10 asset doing Title 15.
Yes, okay.
I'm sorry, what asset?
But is that on, that's not in the budget though, I don't think. Maybe it is, okay. I'd love to talk to you about that.
Okay.
But that's good. So we have one that we're aware of. But the bottom line is
What is it?
RC1 rivet joint.
Got it.
Rivet joint. So again, this is a governance issue. So we have really smart people up on the Hill in uniform and our elected officials, and they don't really scratch their heads because they don't spend any time out here in this AOR asking these questions about how can we get Admiral Aquilino faster at deciding what he needs to do in any given wartime state. So now we're going to get to your question. Here's where does this all fit together? So the planning cycle for the Wheel of Death, and there's a little bit of an Air Force bias in this, is you go from commander's intent through objectives, effects, and guidance, target development, weaponeering, ATO production, execution, and assessment. That's the Wheel of Death. It isn't unique just to the Air Force. The Navy does it, the Army does it. But this is a recursive process that we fight. And today, we essentially do this through deliberate targeting. So basically, in this process was curated in CENTCOM, and in CENTCOM there was really no threat. There was no aggressive threat for airspace control. So we could decide, the coalition could decide when and where we wanted to engage any target without any concern for threats from adversaries.
Excuse me, what's the JOPP stand for?
It's Joint Operations Plan, Production Planning Group.
Production planning process.
Yeah.
Planning process.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
This is out of 13.1 AOC Ball 3. So if anybody wants to get the link, Air Force Rec 13.1 AOC Ball 3. Is Face Rosenbach still in here? He was. So you'll notice that in the center there's a blue oval that says globally integrated ISR. So that's what does that mean in the JOPA planning cycle? Well, today there is no such thing. That's a unicorn. But the desired end state is to have a globally integrated ISR environment. So I'm going to step back now that we've talked a little bit about the ATO production cycle, talk about how globally integrated ISR can actually better affect the results and help the planners and the people who are executing move from a deliberate targeting model to a dynamic targeting model, which is going to be very, very important in this AOR. So, as I said, this is notional. It doesn't exist today. It's a unicorn. It's unobtainium today. The dynamic targeting command point of entry is at the top. So you've got deliberate targeting and dynamic targeting. It's going to happen at the top before commander's intent. And there's going to have to be near real-time reaction, whether it's through RC-135s or other ISR assets. They're telling the commanders what may be going on in the AOR. So, at this point, the briefing is going to get controversial. So I hope if you've got rice and you've got toast and you want to poke me in the eye, please do, because we're going to peel back the onion a little bit on what we need to be doing. This is just my opinion. It doesn't reflect my company or anything. So right now, I would define globally integrated ISR as the Title 10 and the Title 50 entities. And the arrows on this slide should be bidirectional. They should be unidirectional. That's an arrow on the slide. But basically, every ISR stakeholder should be able to give and get ISR data, not applications, data as needed to fight the fight. What do people think about that? Does that make sense?
Yes.
And will we agree that this capability does not exist today, even though there are lots of POM cycles and lots of
Absolutely.
Okay. So I call this the Department of Defense cloud. So we're just going to, and this again, now we're getting into the controversy. So there are people that doesn't matter whether you're at DISA or your 16th Air Force or your 10th Fleet or wherever you might be, and each person has a notional explanation of what a DoD cloud looks like. Usually it's actually an outsourced environment. It's not a dynamic environment that's actually natively owned by any Title 10 or Title 50 agency. It should be parallel, it should be unique, and it should be differentiated from JWCC. JWCC looks a lot like an easy button to me. Programmatically, it's an important part of the greater ISR data fusion strategy. But what needs to be considered is the risk associated with standardizing on an outsourced cloud environment as your sole source of truth in the ISR realm. Yes, sir.
Does your cloud environment include multi-level security?
So that's beyond the scope of this briefing, but a properly applied data fabric that uses the service mesh can be designed and built to pass Java Web Tokens to a stakeholder without the need for a guard. But there will be a requirement to have a formally structured data tagging environment for ISR. It's beyond the scope of this briefing, but the answer is yes.
Okay. So you're talking about, potential solution here. How does something like JADC2, which as I understand is supposed to address, something like that? Why is there a difference?
So JADC2 is at boom plus 0 and to the right.
Right.
So the command and control element for moving from deliberate targeting to dynamic targeting is the JADC2 problem. To get deliberate and dynamic targeting to work best for the warfighters who are doing JADC2 in a multi-domain fight, they got to have better ISR data. So you have D plus 0 on the time continuum, right? So JADC2 is a 0 day forward. The ISR part of this that we're talking about today is D minus, right, to getting your ISR data. But it all kind of rolls it together. And we'll get back to it. Remember the graph where I talked about the wheel of death, the global ISR function that doesn't exist. We're going to get into that. We'll get into that in a minute. Somebody over here. Yes, sir.
Any consideration adding the T into ISR for targeting, especially look at range, flexibility, speed of the environment, and being able to have target quality data that's shareable across boards so that the Army can shoot on a Navy target or Air Force target in real time.
So that's part of the TED. That's part of the TED in the wheel of death, which we'll get at later. Absolutely. That's that part of what you just asked about is at 2 o'clock on the wheel of death. So, and we'll get back to it in a minute. Any other questions? All right, here we go. Outsourced clouds. What do you have? Do you have a single point of failure? Do you have a converged attack surface? And what does it mean to have one ring to rule them all in an outsourced cloud environment? And how do you migrate? So let's just say you pick a hyperscaler. It doesn't matter who. We're not going to name any here. But at some point, there has to be a data curation process. And the hyperscalers are now selling to the DoD. We'll curate your data for you. What's really happening is they're saying, we're going to make our data work with our stuff. But if you want to take our stuff and move it to their stuff, we're not going to help you do that, right? In my opinion, that is a risk. That's a huge risk to the DoD, isn't it? So a hyperscaler piece of this is very important, but there needs to be an understanding of limitations associated with standardizing on one hyperscaler, especially if you lose that hyperscaler or you, due to a geographical requirement, need another one, right? So, and then lastly, getting to the cost of exfiltration of data is kind of what I was just talking about. If you move from hyperscaler A to hyperscaler B, what is the cost to the taxpayer if Admiral Aquilino says, I want to move from this hyperscaler to this hyperscaler because I have something going on in Alaska that can only be served by this other hyperscaler? How does that affect the taxpayer?
Is the hyperscaler the same as cloud service provider?
Yes. Finally, the federation piece. How do you provision a hyperscaler for coalition access? And I was having a conversation with our 2 Army brethren here about 20 minutes ago about this very topic. So you have a Republic of Korea F-35 that has a better shooting solution on an IRBM that's launched by North Korea. But a Title 50 asset from the United States finds that, needs to get that data to the F-35 that happen maybe flying in orbit, they could shoot this thing. How do you rheostat on that data to push the target tracks that you were asking about a minute ago to an F-35 that may be owned by Japan, North Korea, Great Britain, whoever else, so that the best shooting solution is given for the threat that's there? How do you do that with a hyperscaler? I don't think that they've been able to skin that cat yet, unless somebody knows something I don't know. And as I said, this is controversial because when you speak with senior leadership the general knowledge is, we got this. You know, we got this, we've got the hyperscalers and we can do this. But then when you ask the people that are operators at the O5 level and below and at the E8 level and below, how are they gonna fight in the AOR with this? Then all of a sudden you get some questions that are getting asked by the people who actually have to do the mission. Has anybody had that experience firsthand? Are uniformed people in the room?
I think that's possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Another issue that we have is when you want to get data, you have to go to these different repositories to gather that information. So in a centralized platform like this, how do you handle the problem of when combining different types of data, that then changes the classification, and now you have this giant matrix of, you know, depending on what source it came from, what area of the world it came from, you know, now you have this giant matrix on like what's the classification, like how do you solve that problem?
so the 2023 answer is you have to guard and manually use guards to do it, right? And you do it through NPE, you federate to a relative size, and you use the guard to cleanse and curate the data. That's the only way it can be done today. In 2026, a properly architected and orchestrated cloud, as we were talking about earlier, you can have tagged data that is managed natively within the service mesh, where the service mesh will be able to make a decision automatically to say, Korea can have this, or Japan can have this, without a guard. It can be done inside the service mesh. That's a future capability. The technology exists today. If you think of the banking industry, for example, in the banking industry, there are all kinds of transactions going on between banks, so they need to know that if you take money out of ATM A, it's coming out of your Wells Fargo account or your USAA account or whatever. How do they control for the data flows there? It's the same thing, it's nuanced a little bit differently, but they do that using the same type of service mesh cloud technology today. Okay. Any more questions on this one? So how do you coop and paste the ISR data? So our point of view is that the hyperscalers are the last piece of this common data fabric that we were talking about. So we said you've got the Title 10 and the Title 50 that are DoD cloud native. So the hyperscalers have to play here. Again, there's an arrow on the slide. The red arrow should both all be bidirectional, so only unidirectional. So now we're getting back to the wheel of death, where I said, you know, the unobtainium of globally integrated ISR needs to be addressed to get at the JADC2 or the fight piece that you're asking about. So I believe the definition of a globally integrated ISR data fabric or data lake or whatever you want to call it is comprised of the Title 10s, the Title 50s, the fourth estate, and the hyperscalers from a data construct. I'm going to stop there. Does anybody have any comments on that? Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Well, I think you're actually understating the problem, because you're just looking at the accessibility to data. You're just looking at the mesh of the data, or comparing, you know, apples to oranges. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's lots of different ways to store location. That's good.
And so you just tip the iceberg. It gets a whole lot more complex from there on.
Yes, sir, it absolutely does. This briefing could be much longer than it is, but you're touching on, you know, this is the highest of the high level, and then as you drill down to get into your, it's an important piece of what you just mentioned.
Can I have one more point?
Yes, sir.
And on top of that, all the data sources are pre-buried, because there's a lot of manual entry going on across all these data sources. So making sense of which entry is the right entry across multiple disagreeing data sources is another tremendously hard problem.
Yeah.
Oh, you're also gonna have storage side of it. Nobody's gonna want to, at least take that, all of that, that's what I.
That's the governance question that I'm talking about. Yes.
On top of the security, you're gonna have the size, basically.
Well, when you, and then we're a little bit off topic here, but when you look at authoritative sensors and the time value of the data, I think part of it's going to get solved by that, is that there have to be decisions made on what constitutes an authoritative source and the time to live. How long is that data worth anything? And then at the point of expiration for the data, then it gets released out of the operation environment. Right. Right. Yes, sir.
And just to make one more point, this has never been a technical problem.
Yes, sir.
Never been. Always been a policy, programmatic problem, To the point now where most senior leaders have said no problem, have given up on it.
Yeah, I think it wasn't until the service mesh environments for cloud came into play, you had to use the guards. So it was the only way you could get at this problem. But as cloud technology has matured, the need for guards is more of a migration need now. But to your point, part of the governance is coming up with a standard data tagging construct. And DIA has done some of that. But the question is, you've got combat coders and combat ISR people, are they properly trained to comply with the data tagging standards? Again, which is also a governance issue.
Since most individual service components are primarily collectors, they're not elements, right? You can look and analyze what you can see, but you can't see the bigger picture, so you have to get up into that hyperscale environment in order to do that, and then that needs to be the place where it determines what the classification level and what you can share. So governance, but at the end of the day, the guy on the front line is really a collector. He is not a collector.
So I think you're touching on a point of view. I think there needs to be a DCGS-J.
Yeah.
So that doesn't exist. That gets back to the earlier slide, 64 billion for Title 10, 48 for Title 50, 48 billion for Title 10, and no DCGS-J.
That's DCGS-J feed, DCGS-A, DCGS-A.
Doesn't exist. Okay, so back to the job planning cycle and the wheel of death. So now we've defined globally integrated ISR and getting to the question that was asked earlier about dynamic targeting. So we're going to talk a little bit about our cloud tools. You can orchestrate legacy and new application data across disparate clouds, whether it's NGA, NRO, or a hyperscaler environment. Now we're getting into the targeting that was asked about earlier. So once you have a federated data set, you just talked about the PED process, right? Once you've got PEDed and you've got Mars and Egyptal, and you've got your target list set, and this is a little bit of a bias toward deliberate targeting, but then this needs to be happening at the sensor level in dynamic targeting, which is a whole nother briefing. You have the ability to take the ISR data and help in a future state allow AI and ML with a human in the middle to be making recommendations on how dynamic targeting needs to flow. And then the human in the middle can go yes, no, or I have a better idea. But in order to do that, you have to have access to the ubiquitous data set of ISR. Facilitates enhanced data dramatically during major air attack planning. Again, this is a deliberate targeting piece. Either fused with ISR for AI/ML or in a standalone capability, which is what I was just talking about. Now, I'm using the wheel of death to show how the data notionally will be moving through the planning process. You capture dynamic updates during execution and assessment. This is an important part of the moving from deliberate to dynamic targeting. And then you share the assessment with back to the ISR team so that the JFC and the JVAC can make a decision about whether or not another platform and weapons should be deployed on. And having a global joint coalition fight with mission partners is enabled by having a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. I'm going to stop here. I'm sure there are lots of people that may want to look me in the forehead. Does this make sense?
Well, a lot of the DARPA, Mosaic, and a couple others for distributed systems trying to push down the recognition of the target and then executing to destroy the target if you have the capability to do that once you recognize it's there, not waiting for a JVAC to say yay verily. I mean, this is back in the AOC days, you're trying to take something off a deliberate plan target and reallocating it to a DT. So I think the future things at tactical edge and with the pure competitor we're looking at, I don't know if we're going to be having the luxury of stepping through this in there. It's kind of like, do I have the asset, the target is there, I have a good ID, and I have the ROE to execute on it, and I can do it with managing the operational risk. I'm just going to go after it versus trying to go through a reach back process in order to kind of make that go.
So getting back to the governance thing, this briefing could be quite a bit larger than it is.
Oh, yeah.
It's you're asking a governance question, so there has to be standard loadouts at the TOCs, right? The TOCs every day are gonna have F-15Es, and they're gonna have 15,000 pounds of ordnance. It's a standard process that they're gonna be doing. But to your point, they could be flying, and there could be a pop-up that requires a program change, an interim program change, that gets pushed to that F-15 that's already in the air. That's what's gonna happen at 7 o'clock on this slide in a dynamic targeting model. That's what needs to happen, I guess, that's not what's going to, what needs to happen.
Well, that happens today.
It happens today, but it's highly manual.
Agreed.
And so we haven't had the experience of scaling this kind of thing within the 2 distance of 4,000 nautical miles with diminishing resources. So in CENTCOM, and my career was mostly in CENTCOM, we had the luxury of being able to do it because there was no contested environment. But for Admiral Aquilino, with what he's having to deal with the tyranny of distance and limited resources, the manual processes at 7 o'clock that are being done today, there has to be an automated function with a human in the loop saying, we recommend that this 2 ship of F-15s get retasked to this scout or this DDG or whatever it may be.
So as it currently stands, you know, even with a single service, you have governance issues insofar that, you know, you have 2 aircraft, right, that can't speak to each other because they use different, communication technology, right? That's within a single organization. How do you solve that governance issue across different entities? And then who's the champion of this idea?
So we can't really talk about solving the comms issue in here, but the governance issue, I believe, resides with Admiral Aquilino. Admiral Aquilino, any COCOM commander should be putting their finger in the belly button of the Pentagon and saying, we got a problem, we can't wait for your palm cycles and all of your coffee meetings, and I'm being very flippant here. Well, I need results in the AOR, and I need them in 6 months. And you need to deliver me this capability now. It's a difficult problem. This is also not sexy. The other thing about this is data management. You talk to a warfighter, and he or she has been flying F-35s or driving ships or tanks or whatnot. They're going to go, what is this data thing? Data? I mean, I want to buy a new F-35 with this money. And then you have to convince him or her, well, sir, ma'am, the data force multiplier will allow you to get more mileage out of the existing F-35s you already have. That's a hard sell. We're about 2 minutes over on this thing. We finish up. So summary, Battle of Britain demonstrated that signals intelligence, a general kind of catch-all for the primitive natures of the fight was transformational in helping them win that battle. The creation of a common ISR data domain is essential to accelerating the F2C2EA processes in this and any AOR, and can be facilitated by a hardened multi-cloud hybrid cloud approach. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Any forehead flicking? Yes, sir.
Just a question. I'm a C2 guy, not really ISR or anything, but I know, the random ops stores and theaters I've worked in, we're always begging for, the explicit capability to make it ops for ops stores. And I know, the Pentagon and DC is aware that that's an issue with the authorization part of it all, not the technology part, but do you get a sense there's a real muscle movement that they're going to try and solve that issue? Or is it, I'm sure everybody's aware of it in DC, but is there an actual real muscle movement that you get a sense that this is taken seriously and we need to be in that space in the future to make happen your fight?
I wish the senior leadership and our elected leaders spent more time in the COD. They sat there and watched what's going on in the Combat Ops Division in 613, saw what's going on and what they're trying to do. There might be a light bulb that goes off, but sadly, I don't think that the domain problem is fully understood by the people who should be making those decisions. That's my opinion on this.
Are you tracking INDOPACOM mission network and what they're doing, and does that help to solve any of this?
So as a subset of the mission partner environment, that's the current state today. And it is solving some of the problems on comms. In terms of being able to natively re-estab on data through mission partner environment to Republic of Korea or Japan or the 5-axis Americas, rail 5-axis 613 right now. MPE is a more manual process, and IMN is too. They're getting at the problem, and there are other tools. I would love to talk offline about this, but IMN is looking at this through some of the cloud technology that was talked about here. Yes, sir.
David Hurst with Primer. So, agree with everything that you agreed on. One question I have about what is Red Hat's role right now in helping establish this ISR data fabric?
So right now we're socializing the need and the requirement as a company. We have solutions that already exist within Platform One, for example. You could do some of this, but there are governance issues that are way beyond the scope of any software company knows. And the other piece that we didn't really get at here is using a curated open source solution actually that reduces risk, because we haven't talked about the Project Maven problem. So you get a hyperscaler that says, okay, in 2023 we're going to do this, and then the Chinese do a proxy fight in the board of directors for hyperscaler A or B, and they vote in a whole new board of directors, and that board of directors goes, you know what? We're not going to help the DoD anymore. Y'all are effed. You're out. Right? How do you govern that? And then the argument can be made, well, that's true of any software company. Well, it may be true of a company like Red Hat, but because it's open source, if that were to happen, the software is still there, right?
And you don't pigeonhole yourself.
Right. Right. I hope this was informative and enjoyable, and thanks for all the questions, and happy to stay back if anybody wants to talk some more, flip me in the forehead. All good.